Waiting. And we're live. Hey everyone, another round of Spec 3.0 after the holidays, or I guess all of the major holidays are finally over. So yeah, welcome back. Before jumping into it, does anyone have anything they would like to start off with? Anything they would like to say? No? Don't be shy. Okay. I guess we'll jump right into it. So I'm just gonna share my screen real quick. So we just have 2 things for the agenda, but probably gonna add a few more as we go. I still have not, I don't have the full overview of all the things that happened during the holidays. So next time I would like to give an update about the general status of everything. But that will have to wait for next time. In the meantime, I would like to bring up something that Magic introduced or asked for or started a discussion about, which is how we should handle or whether we should have a freeze period between features being added to Spec 3.0 and when tooling needs to be able to adapt to it before it's actually released. Because as soon as you start adding new features or changes to the spec, it means that tooling has to follow. At least that's the general sense. So his proposal is not, it's very open in terms of length, whether that should be happening, and even if we should have a freeze period in general. I think the general consensus so far is there's no consensus. I suggested that we should have a month for the major version and try it out, see what happens. So that means that if we, for example, wanted to release in January, it means that there would be no new changes from the beginning of December. So from December and onwards to January, right before releasing the new spec version, it means that tooling are able to adapt to this, and it's basically just a switch over from branch to branch. Then Fran suggested 3 months because he thinks it's too little to have only 1 month to do it, which is a fair point, especially since it's a major version. And there's going to be quite a few breaking changes that needs to be adapted to, or even features for that matter. Does any of you have any comments, any perspectives, whether you like one or the other? You don't have to yell on top of each other. It's all good. You can take your time.
I'm going to say something. So when you raised this issue in December, I had in mind something more similar to what Frank mentioned, like 3 months, not 1 month. You know, like yeah. I also think 1 month it's not enough. It's not about not being enough, but we can afford being 3 months on this freeze, right? So why not?
Sure. Dale, do you have anything to share? What do you think?
Can we, it's probably just me being thick, but what do we mean by a freeze on the release? Do we mean we nail down what we think the next spec is going to be and we won't make any more changes, and then we allow ourselves 3 months to get all the tooling up to date? Is that the idea?
That's the general idea behind it, yeah.
Okay.
So this means so whenever it's released into what's it called, like the main version, like that's the newest version, then the tooling is already up to date, so you can switch over immediately between tools. So it's already supported, instead of you having to wait whatever time it takes after the spec is released.
I see what you mean. Okay, so in some ways, I guess it's about when do we think of as the release being, as the new version being out, and instead of when the spec is ready, we describe it as when the tooling is ready, and we align the times. Okay, that makes more sense.
And maybe also just to emphasize, because while this is happening, like, I'm not saying that the spec can be used, but it's not entirely impossible to use it in the meantime and switch over. It's just that it's still a release candidate, if that makes sense. So even if we decide that there is these 3 months of waiting period, like, you can still play around with it. The tools just all of them probably haven't been updated yet. So you're just left with an empty shell, more or less, just the spec itself that has been updated. If that makes sense.
I think maybe the name freeze period, now it doesn't sound very well in my mind, you know. I mean, I'm not native speaking English, you know, but it sounds like more in the way you freeze every development, you know. For example, when you're working for a company and you have a freeze period, it's more like, we don't release feature, we don't release anything, right? And here it's not that. It's just, as you mentioned, it's putting the release candidate on hold, right? Like, they're available for 3 months, isn't it?
Yeah, but it means that there won't be any changes to the release candidate from that point onwards, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't stop us making changes in another branch for the next release. So it's not like the spec work has to stop, but just that we draw a line under that particular version.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think we might end up with a little bit of, so let's say that we spend 3 months, let's say we're gonna end up with 3 months freeze period for a major version change. The version after the major version, which is probably just a minor release, would that mean that the release of the main version and the version after that will be kind of on top of each other, maybe a month apart, because you don't have that much of a freeze period with the next version? Would that be a problem? Or, for example, let's say that we end up releasing 3.0 and then releasing 3.1 basically a month apart, because tooling has to get up to date, if that makes sense. Or would that never happen because of the release schedule?
Yeah, I mean, 3.0 is definitely going to be an oddity. I think when we get back to doing more sort of minor versions, it should be fine, I would have thought.
Right.
Yeah, I don't see this applying to minor releases either.
Right. Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that makes sense. So I think we have somewhat of a consensus that 3 months would be a good start, at least somewhere, and see how that goes. We can always change it in retro perspective, right? And see what we do next time if it doesn't work out. So don't forget to write your comment in the issue. Yeah, perfect. I'm gonna not sure if I can actually send. Yeah, I've just shared it on Zoom, at least a link to it. Not sure if can remember if YouTube picks it up. All right, next one. Sergio.
Yeah. You may want to share it on YouTube as well, because it's not being shared.
Okay, well done. I'm not sure I can, but let's see.
Okay. So I wanted to spend a couple of minutes explaining where we are on the development of the Parser.js version 2, which is a breaking change. I'm gonna share first here and over YouTube as well. I hope it's shared. The last updates on the progress. So we are very, very, very close to finish the development of this version, at least to have like a alpha or beta or whatever.
Do you want to share the screen, Sergio?
I don't. Well, yeah. Why not? Why not? Okay, it's here. Okay, this is the issue link I shared with you. This is the latest leftover tasks. As you can see, there are some of them that are not marked as done, but the PRs are already there. They have been, they are being reviewed right now. And some things that are pending that are more related to writing guidelines and README work, basically. There is something that it's not here yet that we will add at some point. It's like small polishments on the code, writing some tests, some missing tests that we didn't write yet. But basically, all the big workload it's done. So what's next? We have been. Where is that? Okay, here. I'm gonna take this to share as well. But there is a discussion open by Maciek about how we want to release this new version. And it's not about the process itself of releasing, but more how we want to sync up with tooling like the generator and templates. Because at the very moment we release the new version, the templates will be using an API that it's not anymore there. Just for remembering, in the new Parser v2, we are completely rewriting the API of the parser. So all of this has to be taken in account just to move all the templates to use the new API, right? So how we want to handle that, the discussion is open, so I encourage you to join. There are already some comments in there and some proposals made by Maciek that make a lot of sense. So that's the next step, or the next big step. And yeah, that's it. Any question?
Is there any consensus yet in terms of which, or is it still up for discussion?
Still discussion, I guess. Yeah, so what Maciek suggested is to by default, because Maciek what suggested is to add the old API on the parser. So we released version 2 with the new API, but also have a way to convert a parse document to the old API. So whenever you import a new parser, you can still use the old API by just calling a helper function. The idea is to release that for some time until we deprecate it, right? And we only have the new API. So templates could use that. So the generator, could use that for calling the the parser methods. And what Maciek suggested is to add a property. I don't know where is that. Yeah, called API version to determine which version of the parser a template should use. By default would be I think the old one. Yeah. So it means everything will keep working unless you say, oh, I want to use the new version. Then you will have to write everything right. This is the suggestion, but this is what we are discussing in this issue. Yep, that's it. And why this is related again with version 3 of the spec is because we want to release this parser way earlier to the version 3, because the new API being used is basically like a generic API that will work with the version 3 as well. So there will be no breaking change. If everything goes as expected, there will be no breaking change whenever we release version 3 of the spec. So people using the new parser will be able to keep working without changing anything, just updating. They will be able to keep working using the same API. So no breaking change in place.
I think that makes sense. I think we will want some way to encourage people to move forward, but I think we can always do that like later on when the new version is out, deprecating the default behavior to nudge people to start moving across and enabling the new behavior. So I think, yeah, what you described makes total sense to me.
I agree.
All right. That's all on my side.
All right. Does anyone have anything they want to discuss, or I have one more thing I would like to introduce. I introduced it before it went on holiday, but that's quite a while ago, so I'll probably do it again just to get some more visibility to it. But does any of you have anything you would want to add before? Okay. So this one sparks joy between me and Sergio, because we spent 4 hours trying to digest a comment or a clarification of it. So this is probably one of the things that are difficult to explain for me, so it might take a little while. So at the moment, Async API uses a standard called JSON reference. It's a reference that other specifications also use, quite a lot actually. But there is a problem with it for our use case, which is in Async API, you can define message payload with different schema formats. This means that we're not tied with JSON schema specifically. We also have Avro. We could also, in theory, have protobuf, or maybe even GraphQL schemas, XSD schemas, whatever other schema format you might want to use, you could actually do it with Async API. This use case is quite unique to the standards, because from an open API perspective, it's always paired with JSON schema. You can't change it. That is the one schema format that you have to use. Then they upgrade the version that the standard uses, but it's still JSON schema. Protobuf have its own format for defining message payload. GraphQL has GraphQL schemas. Like all of these standards always have just one way of defining schemas. So this means that we kind of encounter somewhat of a new use case, and that is we want to reference non-JSON schema files. Let's call it that. Yeah. So this means that if I want to reference that my message payload is defined using an XSD file, I should be able to reference it. And in theory, tooling should be able to understand it. The problem is that then that means that JSON, which is what we write async API in, has to understand an XML format. And there is no standard that defines this behavior of how to handle references that are non-JSON. And that is what this PR kind of tries to fix or clarify and enable us to do. It introduces a new standard that we will reference instead of JSON reference. And at the moment, I wrote it as a RFC, which is basically that this could be used by other standards as well. So it's not specifically focused on async API that much. So what it does is it takes all of the things that we have in JSON reference and then applies certain behaviors for non-JSON, like when we link to non-JSON files. So this means that this standard is what we usually refer to as a superset of JSON reference. So what worked before with JSON reference still works with this new standard, and we don't have to change anything. It just enables us to do something called linking. For example, linking to an protobuf file or an XSD file, whatever other non-JSON data we would like to link to. I lost my, what's it called, train of thought for a moment, 2 seconds. In order to do this, the standard defines something called a reference format. This is a keyword that async API, for example, would have to define, which we already do, which is called schema format. It uses these MIME types to determine what the referenced resource is. So this means that in tooling, you know from the runtime perspective exactly what it is you're fetching. So this means that you can apply different behaviors to it. By this standard, all it does is defining that any non-JSON references should be loaded into memory, or basically just loaded as a string, so the tools have access to it. And this is actually the main part of this suggestion. It is just a standard for how to load non-JSON data. That's it. It's basically just achieving this. So tooling are able to do this in a standard way. How you would then interact with this protobuf file, for example, or protobuf content, that is still up for debate, or it's up to each implementation to figure out, because there can be multiple ways you want to interact with it. And there's not really a standard that we can apply here, which makes it kind of even harder to do. But at least it enables the user to reference other formats than just JSON formats. There is some opposing views. For example, Jeremy argues that there is no need for defining a new standard if as long as the referenced data or the reference resource can be understood in a JSON, I want to say notation, but that's probably wrong. Because, for example, when you look at an XML document, I don't want to say it's easy to convert it to JSON, but it's not that difficult. And yeah, then we have some discussion about like, how can you use fragments, for example? How can you look into an XML file and access a very specific part of that object? That's not possible with the, I chose to just say it's simply not allowed for non-JSON data because that was the easy part. But I think we ended up, me and Sergio ended up with a change that actually enables the user of the, no, not the user, the how can I say that? The
consumer, maybe.
Yeah, the consumer of the standard to define this behavior. For example, in this case for async API, we can define very specifically how fragments work for Avro, how fragments work for protobuf, how fragments work for x60 or XML files. So this means that we, from the users of this new standard, we are able to very finely tune how we want this behavior to work.
And maybe you can add some context on why this, because depending on what I can say, depending on, so it's not the same for async API, the data that it wants to retrieve, right? So there could happen that there are some technical limitations on what part of the document you can grab. And because of that, maybe you from the point of view of async API, you are maybe only interested in some part. For example, in protobuf, you are interested in the message or something like this, right? But maybe other specs or other consumers, as this word just got right here, maybe they are interested in other parts, but because of those technical limitations, if you set a standard that pretends or tries to work for everyone, yeah, it may happen that some consumers will be penalized and won't be able to access the data they want, right? It's very abstract.
It is very abstract.
We have to add some examples there.
We do, yeah. Yeah, me and Sergio spent 4 hours today discussing Henry's comment about clarifying different parts of these standards, because we have, in order to understand this issue in depth, it means that you have to understand somewhat of 8 standards and how they interact with each other, which is, it gets hairy real quick, and especially when we start talking about it. So I'm hoping we'll reach somewhat of a consensus that it's needed, that this new standard is needed, because we simply don't define this behavior anywhere.
Hey, Jonas, can I ask a quick sort of procedural question?
Of course.
So this lays outside async API, and I think that's appropriate, because I do think it's a sort of a widespread problem. To get this approved, what body would you appeal to for this? Like, so the JSON schema, or who's the one that signs off on this kind of thing?
This is it's a good question, because I haven't really thought it through yet, because all I see this is as it's basically just an IFC. It's just, this is a standard that we want to follow. Others can, if they have this same use case, they can apply the same standard. And I won't say the problem, but
Challenge?
The challenge is that it has to accompany tooling. We have to create tooling for us to understand this new standard. And the important part is that we have to create tooling regardless of whether we accept this new standard or not. Because there's no tooling at the moment that enables us to properly use references at the moment.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I guess the challenge is, in the meantime, you're sort of redefining a known entity from, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but JSON schema to do something other than what it's intended to do, which is always sort of a dangerous scenario, right? Like $ref is meant to point to JSON, and I totally am empathetic to, like, you know, it should be easy to do something else other than that. But it's just it's interesting, the conundrum. But I definitely appreciate the attempt at this, because I think it's a huge thing for async API.
It definitely is, and it's also very important to note, and this is something I discussed with Fran before I went on holiday, or I can't remember which meeting it was, that this is basically just a feature. This does not need to be in Spec 3.0, this change, because it's a superset of JSON reference. It means that everything that you did before with references still works. It just specifically defines behavior for linking to non-JSON data files. So it's a feature, it's not a breaking change, this specific change. And that's maybe the important part here. That if we agree to use this standard, it's just a feature down the road, and it's something that we might not include in Spec 3.0. But I think it's worth discussing at least.
Yeah,
because
I think it's real real nice thing to include in 3.0, even though as you've encountered, it's a hard thing. But I do, like, especially as we sort of encounter the protobufs of the world, and there's a ton of people still using EDI. It would be real nice to have that in XML. I mean, you look at events coming out of SAP. I mean, that's a huge thing, and those are XML data. So, yeah, I would encourage us to look at it for V3, and you know, I think your solution is in the right vein. It's just, you know, is overriding what's a pretty well defined $ref. You know, is that kosher, or should we try to do something else? But I think you're in the right area, certainly.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, yeah, we are basically overriding ref, because we could introduce another keyword.
Right.
So for linking, if you want to link to a protobuf file, then you use something like my link or whatever other keyword
non-JSON schema or something like that. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's definitely another option.
Yeah, and I guess I just don't, between those two, like, I like your PR. Just, you know, do we need to use $ref? I guess I don't have full visibility in what that is. I'd actually be interested in what Dale thinks, because I'm sure Dale has. I guess I won't speak for Dale, but, you know, IBM has such interesting interactions with the legacy world through MQ. I'd be interested to see what you think about sort of the implications for COBOL copybooks, that type of thing, Dale.
I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm mulling it over.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No,
Dale,
no.
I know that. So the earlier comments that we got from the JSON community or JSON schema community was that exactly the same thing that you have said, Jesse, which is we could use another keyword that doesn't mix up this. It doesn't mix up these standards all of the sudden, which makes sense. The reason why I chose not to do it is because the user of the spec don't care. They just want to reference to shit.
Yeah, sorry, that struck me as
They,
funny.
I mean, they don't. At least from my perspective, I wouldn't want to have to remember whether to use my other reference keyword or
Right,
using
right.
ref. I would
Yeah, I
just
guess
use one keyword.
I guess the challenge, and I'm pretty far removed from the code, but I assume that there's a lot of standard libraries for parsing out JSON, and that would include native handling for $refs. And so if you throw non-JSON at these standard libs, I assume that you run into issues pretty quickly, because those standard libs don't understand what we're doing.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I actually don't know what the tooling will do if it encounters a reference to a non-JSON data or non-JSON resource. I can't remember.
In some, Michael Davis from Solace did some experimentation with this, and I do seem to remember, at least with some libs, that it came in as just a string, which is a behavior I think that you want. But I wouldn't bet the house that every lib would do that. So it's
No, that's true.
a gamble.
Oh, that's a bit of a dilemma. Yeah, I haven't thought about that. That's worth taking into account.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a survey of like, what is the fallback behavior if these pretty common parsers across Java, Python, Go encounter something that's not.
Yeah,
that try reference a non-JSON.
And the weird part is that the standard doesn't define this behavior, as far as I can remember. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't remember anywhere within JSON reference, for example, that states anything like how to handle or fail if it encounters a non-JSON file or resource. I think I have to look into that. Yeah, that's true. Jesse, do you mind adding that as a comment to the PR? Just so I can keep that in mind. That would be appreciated. So yeah, that's one of the things I struggle with at the moment, which is exactly this. It's almost too much standardization in one thing, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage you, just to keep on it, because regardless if we use $ref or some sort of custom tag, I think that your solution is very similar to ones that we have discussed internally at Solace, and I think it's really, really needed as people use things that are different than JSON. So,
right, yeah,
that's not particularly helpful, but I do think it's a worthy goal for V3.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Yeah, and it wouldn't. I guess it just comes down to the how we prioritize. Do we prioritize the user or do we prioritize the developers that creates tooling for it? And also, I guess, those that uses tooling in terms of these failing behaviors, like fallback behaviors, how it will be able to handle them. Right. Yeah, I'm gonna work some more on it and see probably share some updates next time as well. But yeah, any feedback is appreciated. Let me just share it there. That is actually all I had. I don't think I have anything else. Try it. Does any of you have anything you want to finish off with? No,
not for me.
All right. I guess we can end early then. Perfect. So yeah, thanks for participating, everyone. And I guess I'll see you next time.